520 million years ago, from the primordial gloom of the ocean, a nightmare took form. It was a creature with 5 eyes, perched on fleshy stalks that swiveled independently, granting it a panoramic view of its world. From beneath this bizarre crown of vision, a long proboscis extended, tipped with a grasping spined claw. Its mouth, hidden below, was no instrument of simple consumption. Its victims were organisms that wore armor of stone and saw the world through eyes of crystal. This is not the chronicle of a distant galaxy. This is the story of our own planet, 300 million years before the first dinosaurs walked the Earth. It is a story that explains how our own ancestor, a creature no larger than a little finger, survived this theater of madness. It is the story of why we have a spine. And it begins, as all great stories do, with a catastrophe. 700 million years ago, the Earth was a silent white sphere. A global glaciation had locked the world in ice, a deep freeze that stretched from pole to pole. Even at the equator, the ice was kilometers thick. The surface temperature plummeted to -50 degrees Celsius. It was a world of profound stillness, entombed in a frozen shroud. Yet, deep beneath the ice, at volcanic fissures bleeding heat into the abyss, life waited. For hundreds of millions of years, simple bacteria clung to existence in these geothermal oases. Then, 635 million years ago, the planet's molten heart roared back to life. A series of volcanic eruptions on a planetary scale tore through the ice, venting millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the thin atmosphere. A greenhouse effect of unimaginable power took hold. The temperature crept upwards. The ice groaned, cracked, and began to yield. Glacial shields the size of continents fractured and plunged into the sea, unleashing tsunamis hundreds of meters high. The planet shed its frozen skin and, for the first time in an eon, took a breath. Sunlight pierced the water. In response, cyanobacteria bloomed in a planetary-scale explosion of life, painting the oceans a vibrant green and beginning the great work of pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. The levels were meager, only a few % of what they are today. A human would have suffocated in moments, but for the crucible of evolution, it was fuel enough. Between 580 and 550 million years ago, the seafloor was populated by beings of profound strangeness. Paleontologists call it the Garden of Ediacara. Quilted mattresses of flesh, fractal leaves, and ribbed discs lay passively on the sediment. They possessed no eyes, no mouths, no stomachs. The ocean itself was a nourishing broth, and they simply lay in it, absorbing sustenance through their entire surface. It was the only moment in the history of complex life without predator and prey. A world of absolute peace. This silent kingdom, however, was built on borrowed time. Deep in the code of life, mutations were accumulating. Nature was preparing a revolution. In the silt, beneath the placid giants, a new kind of creation was stirring. They were small, modal, and hungry. They burrowed, they scavenged, they experimented with the radical concept of an active life. 545 million years ago, one of these experiments crossed a threshold. Analysis of ancient rock reveals a network of tunnels, furrows, and tracks, evidence that these subterranean pioneers were not merely hiding. They were digging 3-dimensional labyrinths, actively hunting microbes, and perhaps even turning on one another. This was the spark. The ensuing Cambrian Explosion transformed the quiet, empty room of the ocean into a teeming, chaotic metropolis. In a geological blink of an eye, nearly every major animal blueprint we know today appeared. arthropods with jointed legs, mollusks with shells, our own chordate ancestors, echinoderms, worms, and sponges. All the great branches of the animal tree of life diverged in this single, violent, and creative frenzy. The peace was shattered, but in its place, the architecture of the modern world was forged. A world built not on tranquility, but on the chase. The very nature of existence was about to change. For hundreds of millions of years, life had been a quiet, passive affair. But in the deep silence of the Cambrian Ocean, a new sound began to echo. The sharp crack of armor, the sickening crunch of a shattered carapace. For the first time in the planet's history, death had a voice. The revolution began with a single, violent thought. Until this moment, multicellular life had largely been content to filter water, to wait for sustenance to drift by. But one creature decided against this slow patience. It decided it would be far more efficient to chase down its neighbor and consume it whole. Predation was born, not by accident, but by design. Active, relentless, and utterly without mercy. It was the first murder. We will never know the identity of that first killer. Perhaps it was a worm, armed with primitive jaws, that accidentally bit a piece from another and discovered the profound nutritional value of its own kind. It was a revelation written in energy, an idea so powerful it would be etched into the fabric of life itself. Through the cold calculus of natural selection, this for aggression and pursuit flooded the population. For the gentle, stationary life forms of the preceding Ediacaran period, it was an apocalypse. Their world of soft-bodied quilts and passive grazers collapsed into chaos. Within the span of a few million years, almost the entire Ediacaran biota vanished. They were not outcompeted. They were eaten. A new era had dawned, an era of war where survival belonged only to those who could attack or those who could defend. And the undisputed king of this new, brutal world was Anomalocaris. Its name translates to abnormal shrimp, a profound understatement for the creature that became the apex predator of its age. Anomalocaris was the Tyrannosaurus of the Cambrian seas. While most animals were the size of a human fingernail, this titan grew to 60 centimeters, with some species reaching a terrifying 1 meter in length. In that miniature world, a meter-long hunter was not an animal. It was a living nightmare, the Godzilla of the ancient oceans. Its body was a masterpiece of lethal hydrodynamics, segmented, flexible, and powerfully muscled. Along its flanks, rows of overlapping lobes beat in perfect synchrony, propelling it through the water with terrifying speed. Modern stingrays. From the front of its head extended two formidable appendages, grasping arms studded with vicious to impale the shell of a victim, digging deep into its armor, making escape an impossibility. But its mouth was an invention of pure horror. Located on the underside of its head, it was not a jaw, but a circular disc of chitinous plates, arranged in concentric rings and lined with razor-sharp teeth. It resembled the aperture of a camera or a mechanical hole punch. This mouth did not chew. It crushed. It contracted with immense force, a biological vice grip that could shatter the hardened shells of trilobites and mollusks with a single, decisive snap. Paleontologists have unearthed the fossilized remains of its victims, their carapaces bearing the telltale wounds. Perfectly circular holes punched clean through their defenses, the shape a perfect match for the terrible mouth of Anomalocaris. Yet its most sophisticated and dangerous weapon was its vision. Perched on stalks, it possessed a pair of enormous compound eyes, each composed of thousands of individual lenses or ommatidia. This granted it perception of incredible acuity. Anomalocaris could detect the slightest movement from several meters away, assess the size of its prey, select the most vulnerable target, and strike with surgical precision. The mobile stalks gave it a field of view approaching 360 degrees. To sneak up on this creature was impossible. The evolution of sight forever rewrote the rules of life. Before this, evolution had proceeded blindly, in the most literal sense. Animals encountered one another by chance. The hunt was a matter of luck. But now, the ocean had become transparent. The predator could see the prey, and for the first time, the prey could see the predator. There was nowhere to hide. The chase had begun. If you are hunted, if you are marked for death, two paths open before you. Become better at fighting, or become better at fleeing. This is the engine of the arms race, a dynamic born in these Cambrian waters that has driven the dizzying complexity of life ever since. The terror of being seen forced the evolution of speed, of camouflage, of armor, and of greater intelligence. The ancient war had begun. And in the 500 million years since, it has never once stopped. In the dawn of complex life, a fundamental choice presented itself to the animal kingdom: to become faster or to become harder. In the seething waters of the Cambrian period, 500 million years ago, life overwhelmingly chose the latter. It began to build fortresses from its own body. The oceans, a vast mineral-rich soup, had experienced a calcium boom. And from this elemental broth, creatures learned to conjure armor. They began to extract minerals from the water, primarily calcium, and with an unconscious architectural genius, they constructed a breathtaking array of defensive structures. Carapaces and shells, spines and shields, intricate exoskeletons of breathtaking complexity. The age of armor had begun. Behold the trilobite, an emblem of this calcified world. For millions, their fossilized remains are a faint memory from a school biology classroom. But in their time, they were masters of their domain. These creatures encased themselves in heavy, segmented plating forged from calcium carbonate. Their very name, meaning three-lobed, speaks to their design. A body divided into a distinct head, a thorax, and a tail. Each segment articulated with the next, granting them a surprising flexibility. When danger loomed, a trilobite could roll itself into an impenetrable sphere, a defensive posture echoed today by the humble woodlouse and the formidable armadillo. This hardened exterior was a near-perfect defense, shielding its soft, vulnerable interior from the crushing jaws of the era's new predator. But the trilobites were not merely passive victims hiding within their citadels. They were active participants in the escalating conflict. They joined the arms race, developing one of the most remarkable sensory organs the world had ever seen. Compound eyes, built not of soft tissue, but of inorganic crystal. Each lens was a piece of pure, transparent calcite, precisely oriented to refract light. This mineral-based vision granted them an astonishingly wide field of view, a profound ability to perceive motion, depth, and the direction of light in the murky depths. The ocean had begun to boil with evolutionary pressure. This was the genesis of a relentless, self-perpetuating cycle. A predator evolves sharper jaws. Its prey engineers a thicker shell. A hunter develops keen eyesight. Its quarry perfects the art of camouflage. The process snowballed, a feedback loop of adaptation and counter-adaptation known as the Red Queen hypothesis. It is named for the character in Lewis Carroll's tale who explained that, in her world, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. It was in this bloody crucible that the essential tools of all future complex life were forged. Brains to plan and strategize. nervous systems for instantaneous reaction, hearts to pump oxygen to straining muscles, and a suite of sense organs to see, to hear, to feel the faintest vibrations of an approaching threat. These were not gifts of a benevolent nature. They were desperate inventions, born of a single primal imperative: the fear of being eaten. Evolution is a merciless editor, and survival was granted only to those who could adapt faster than their adversaries. And yet, amid this chaos of clattering jaws, hardened carapaces, and piercing spines, something else stirred. In the soft mud of the seafloor, an inconspicuous creature lay hidden. It was called Pikaia. It resembled a small, flattened eel, barely 5 centimeters in length. Its body was streamlined, its color a dull, unassuming gray, designed to merge with the silt. It possessed no armor, no powerful mandibles, no venomous spines. It was, by all appearances, the perfect victim, an ideal morsel for any passing predator. But Pikaia harbored a revolutionary secret. Running along the length of its back, from head to tail, was a supple yet resilient rod, the notochord. This was the prototype of the spine, nature's first radical experiment with an internal skeleton rather than an external one. The notochord served as a flexible, durable anchor for a new kind of musculature. Along its body ran segmented, V-shaped blocks of muscle. When the muscles on one side contracted and the other relaxed, the body would bend, creating a wave of motion that propelled it through the water. It was a sinuous, serpentine dance. This method was not the fastest, but it offered a crucial advantage: agility. While the armored behemoths were powerful but cumbersome, Pikaia could change direction in an instant, darting and weaving with a freedom its shelled contemporaries could never match. It chose a different path. While the world invested in exterior walls, Pikaia was developing a central pillar. The trilobites, with their crystalline eyes and segmented armor, would dominate the seas for 250 million years, only to vanish forever. Their strategy of rigidity, of building an ever-stronger fortress, ultimately led to a dead end. But the fugitive in the mud, the soft-bodied, unassuming Pikaia, carried the future within its simple form. That internal rod was a blueprint for the ages, the humble beginning of a lineage that would abandon the seafloor, conquer the land, take to the skies, and one day look back at the stars and contemplate its own improbable origin. In the ancient darkness of the Cambrian Sea, a world without sound as we know it, a flicker of movement. A small, unassuming creature slips through the narrow crevices between stromatolites, a ghost in the primordial water. It was a master of evasion, a whisper of life in a world teeming with armored alien forms. This creature was Pikaia, and it represented the single, fragile thread in the grand tapestry of life from which all vertebrate animals would descend. Every fish that glides through the silent deep, every amphibian that haunts the marshlands, every reptile that basks upon the sun-baked earth, the serpents, the tortoises, the great crocodiles, all mammals, and all of humanity. Had that lineage snapped 520 million years ago, our story would have ended before it had a chance to begin. The great experiment of the backbone, of the internal skeleton, would have been a footnote in the history of a planet ruled by other, stranger things. But how can we know any of this? It was 500 million years in the past. Time is a relentless editor. Soft tissues decay in days. The delicate architecture of life dissolves, leaving only the hard parts behind. The bones, the shells, the carapaces of a bygone world. Yet we were granted a profound stroke of luck. Scattered across the globe are geological miracles known as Lagerstätten. These are sites of exceptional fossil preservation, stone archives that capture not just the skeleton, but the entire organism. They are windows into deep time, and they are extraordinarily rare. Scarcely a few dozen are known to exist on the entire planet. One of the greatest of these windows was thrown open in the early 20th century, high in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. The year is 1909. The place, British Columbia, at an altitude of more than 2,000 meters. A paleontologist, Charles Doolittle Walcott, is making his way along a mountain trail on horseback. Legend claims his horse stumbled on a loose piece of shale. Walcott dismounted, and with the practiced motion of his trade, took his geological hammer and split the stone. What he saw inside made him freeze. Pressed into the rock was the impression of a creature. But it was not a mere silhouette, not a simple outline of a shell. Everything was there. The delicate tracery of its antennae, the ghostly outline of its internal organs, its gills, even the infinitesimal bristles on its limbs. It was as if an artist had rendered the animal in charcoal, with photographic precision, moments after its death. Walcott knew, in that instant, he had stumbled upon something of monumental importance. He had discovered the Burgess Shale, one of the greatest treasure troves in the history of paleontology. Here, 508 million years ago, a cataclysm occurred. An underwater mudslide, perhaps triggered by an earthquake, sent tons of silt and clay cascading down a submarine cliff. The avalanche was instantaneous, a silent, suffocating blanket that covered an entire section of the seafloor and all the animals living upon it. The burial was so swift that many creatures were frozen in the midst of their daily lives. Some were crawling, others were feeding, still others were hunting. Death was immediate, their bodies sealed within the fine-grained mud. Crucially, the environment was anoxic. The silt was so dense that oxygen could not penetrate it. The engines of decay, the bacteria that feast on flesh, were starved of the fuel they needed to work. The bodies did not decompose. Over millions of years, a patient alchemy began. Minerals slowly replaced the organic tissues, atom by atom, preserving their forms with breathtaking fidelity. When scientists began the painstaking work of reconstructing these creatures, they were confronted with a biological fever dream. Consider Opabinia. Here was an animal with a soft body, about 7 centimeters long, fringed with lateral lobes for swimming. But it was the head that defied all biological convention. It possessed 5 eyes, 5 mushroom-shaped eyes on stalks, pointing in different directions. Was it for a 360-degree view? A form of depth perception we cannot comprehend? We still do not know. And from its face extended a long, it was as if an elephant's trunk ended not in nostrils, but in a grasping, predatory hand. When the paleontologist Harry Whittington first presented a reconstruction of this animal to his colleagues, the room erupted in laughter, certain it was a joke. But it was no joke. It was a glimpse into a world of failed experiments, of evolutionary paths not taken. These stone ghosts are a testament not to a grand, predetermined design, but to the breathtaking, chaotic inventiveness of life itself. A humbling reminder that our own world, our own form, is but one possible outcome in an infinity of could-have been. The year is 1972. Within the hallowed halls of Oxford University, a conference is underway. The air is thick with academic decorum, the quiet hum of a slide projector the only sound. Then, an image flickers onto the screen. A fossil reconstruction of an animal so alien, so utterly baffling, that a ripple of disbelief, then a wave of laughter, washes over the assembly. The scholars in attendance believe they are witness to an elaborate prank. But it was no joke. This was a ghost from a lost world, a creature dredged from the 500-million-year-old shales of the Cambrian period. Its form was so strange, so defiant of biological logic, that human imagination struggled to even conceive of it. Its name, bestowed upon it by the paleontologist Simon Conway Morris, would forever capture that initial shock: hallucigenia. It was, quite literally, a hallucination etched in stone. For decades, this creature remained an enigma, a puzzle box with no instructions. Scientists turned it over and over in their minds and in their diagrams, unable to determine its top from its bottom, its front from its back. The first interpretation proposed it walked upon a surbiological absurdity. Later, the entire animal was flipped. Perhaps it walked upon the soft, tentacular legs, using the sharp spines as a defensive crown along its spine. It was not until the 1990s, with the discovery of better preserved specimens, that its true orientation was finally understood. Hallucigenia was merely a single, bizarre actor on a primordial stage that had suddenly exploded with life. The central mystery was far grander. What happened approximately 545 million years ago? What lit the fuse for the Cambrian Explosion, a period when evolution appeared to hit its accelerator, compressing millions of years of change into a geological blink of an eye? For more than a century, this question has haunted science. The consensus has slowly formed that there was no single cause, but a perfect storm, a convergence of powerful forces that reinforced one another. For a long time, the leading protagonist in this story was oxygen. The theory was elegant in its simplicity. To be a large, active, complex animal, a hunter, requires immense energy. And the fuel for that energy is oxygen. Surge in oxygen levels, paving the way for life's great leap forward. But in July of 2024, a study published in Nature Geoscience turned this long-held theory on its head. Scientists analyzed ancient rock formations, meticulously measuring isotopic markers, the subtle ratios of carbon, iron, and sulfur left behind by ancient geochemistry. The results were astonishing. The animals of the Cambrian Explosion required far less oxygen than anyone had imagined. They thrived on just 5 to 10% of modern levels, an atmospheric equivalent of 1 or 2%. To us, these would be nearly suffocating conditions. More damning still, the data revealed that the full oxygenation of the planet's oceans, the Great Saturation Event, didn't occur until around 400 million years ago, a full 140 million years after the explosion had already run its course. Oxygen was a factor, but it was not the primary truth. The answer lay deeper, in the very bones of the Earth itself. The second great factor was geological. Around 750 million years ago, the vast supercontinent of Rodinia began to tear itself apart. The planet's crust groaned and fractured, creating immense rift valleys, thrusting up new mountain ranges and forging thousands of miles of new coastline. The area of contact between land and water increased exponentially. This geological upheaval unleashed a force of immense creative power: erosion. The continents began to actively dissolve. Mountains were ground into sand, and great rivers carried a torrent of mineral wealth into the global ocean. Every year, millions of tons of calcium, phosphorus, iron, and silicon poured into the seas, transforming the planet's oceans into a rich, saturated mineral broth. Of all these new ingredients, one was key: calcium. For eons, life had been soft, vulnerable, and yielding. Animals were little more than complex arrangements of cells, with no shells, no skeletons, no armor. They lacked the fundamental building blocks. Now, With the seas awash in calcium, nature had flung open the doors to its storehouse. And life answered. It began to build. This was the dawn of biomineralization. Organisms evolved the ability to extract calcium from the water and deposit it within their own tissues. Perhaps it began as a simple detoxification process, a way to sequester an overabundance of minerals that had become toxic. But evolution soon discovered a profound secondary benefit. These hard structures offered protection. The moment the first shell appeared, the first spine sharpened, an evolutionary arms race began. Soft bodies were no longer safe. Armor demanded better weapons. Weapons demanded stronger armor. Yet, even a sea full of minerals and a world of predators is not enough. There was a third, silent factor at play: the genetic blueprint. Deep within the cells of these simple organisms, the genetic toolkit for building complex bodies, the very genes that map out a head from a tail, a limb from a torso, was already falling into place. The geological revolution provided the raw materials, the ecological pressures provided the motive, and genetics provided the means. The stage was not just set. The actors finally had their script. The story of our own existence, of every animal that has ever walked, swum, or flown, is not written in a single sentence, but in the slow, grinding language of rock, the sudden chemistry of the sea, and the ghost of a genetic code waiting for its moment to build a world. In the deep silence before the dawn of the Cambrian, between 700 and 600 million years ago, a quiet revolution unfolded within the very code of life. A profound alteration occurred in the DNA of the world's first animals, a change that would dictate the future of all complex life on Earth. The Hox genes, the master architects of anatomy, duplicated and diversified. Think of these genes as a suite of master control switches, a regulatory network that dictates the fundamental body plan of an organism. Each switch is responsible for the development of a specific segment of the body. One gene activates, and a head, complete with nascent eyes, begins to form. Another is thrown, and a limb sprouts from the torso. A third flickers on, and the intricate structures of wings or gills emerge. Before this event, the animal kingdom possessed only a simple toolkit, perhaps a dozen basic genes, capable of building little more. But with the duplication of this genetic blueprint, the possibilities for life became almost infinite. The new complexity allowed for the construction of segmented bodies, a modular design that could be endlessly customized. Specialized appendages could now be engineered: legs for walking, claws for grasping, gills for breathing, antennae for sensing the subtle vibrations of the world. Complex sensory organs could be crafted. Tissues could differentiate into an array of specialized forms: contractile muscle, conductive nerve, and resilient connective tissue. The genetic stage was set for an explosion of form. But this genetic potential required a trigger, an external pressure to force its expression. This catalyst was not a change in chemistry or climate, but a behavioral innovation, the first deliberate act of predation. With the arrival of the first hunter, the ancient equilibrium of the primordial seas was shattered forever. This predator introduced an unprecedented selective pressure into the ecosystem. A brutal new imperative echoed through the waters: adapt or perish. For the first time, to be slow, to be soft, to be simple was a death sentence. Those who could not flee or defend themselves were consumed, their genetic lines extinguished. Survival now belonged to those with the slightest advantage: a marginally thicker skin, muscles capable of a more rapid contraction, a sensory apparatus that could detect danger a moment sooner. The survivors passed these life-saving traits to their offspring, launching an evolutionary arms race that continues to this day. The option to remain simple was removed from the board. Any lineage that tried was swiftly eaten into extinction. The legacy of this Cambrian arms race defined the destiny of our planet. Consider this staggering fact. Every major body plan, or phylum, that exists today arose during this brief window of geologic time. In the 500 million years that have passed since, nature has not invented a single, fundamentally new blueprint for animal life. Not emergence of whales, elephants, and humans has been merely a variation on themes written in Cambrian stone. They are refinements, specializations, and elaborations on a foundational design, but never a new architecture. After the Cambrian, evolution became profoundly conservative. It began to work within the established frameworks, perfecting details rather than overhauling the fundamentals. Perhaps it was because every major ecological niche had been claimed. A novel body plan, emerging in a world already crowded with highly specialized competitors, would be instantly outmaneuvered and crushed. Or perhaps the constraints became genetic. The Hox genes, the architects of this revolution, became so deeply embedded in the developmental process that any radical change to their function became lethal. You cannot redesign the foundation of a skyscraper once 10 stories have been built upon it. The entire structure would collapse. We live today in a world forged by the winners of a Cambrian lottery. We exist because, 500 million years ago, a distant, minuscule ancestor managed to evade the jaws of a predator. All of human civilization, our art, our science, our culture, all of it is a distant echo of that infinitesimal moment of survival. You are the result of an unbroken chain of life stretching back 545 million years. A continuous, staggering victory against the forces of oblivion. Consider the unbroken thread of your existence. Not one of your ancestors, in a lineage stretching across the eons, was devoured before it could reproduce. They survived the frozen hell of a snowball Earth and witnessed the dawn of the first great predators. They passed through the fire of 5 mass extinctions, unimaginable cataclysms that repeatedly reset the course of life itself. Your presence is the result of an unbroken chain of victories in a biological arms race where the only prize was tomorrow. Every time your eyes open, you are using an optical system whose fundamental principles were engineered over 500 million years ago. The segmented spine that grants you motion is a direct descendant of a prototype first assembled in the Cambrian seas. Even the very architecture of the brain you use to comprehend these words was first sketched out then. The Cambrian Explosion was not merely a chapter in a textbook. It is the living foundation of our world. It was the moment the universe, through the vessel of life, first began to see, to feel, and to know itself. We are the inheritors of that primordial awakening, a legacy of impossible survival written into our very bones.